Yeah, that was
ballistic
after.
vest on.
Yeah, that was after.
But so as a law enforcement officer, our main goal is to go home at night. That's the goal. Go home at night with your families. So you do everything you can in order to protect yourself, protect your partners, and protect innocent parties out there too. So, but again, also not using excessive force that's not necessary.
The Treehouse. The story Netflix couldn't tell. Part 4 of 6.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
But, it's, destiny does what it does. I mean, that was our last, for me, I was ready to sell my home in New Orleans and leave the country. I was going to go back to Europe and, just take my money. And and it's like almost as if, there is some kind of divine intervention that things happen in a way that problematic, all your thinking and all of your intentions and everything just don't align with something else that's bigger than us. I always said to Scott, and I know Scott felt the same way, is that I felt like we were used for something in a way. Does that make sense? There's no clandestine entity behind us making us do it, but there was a silent force that motivated us. And I don't know how to explain it, because there was nothing in me or in him, really. As a personality, you met him on the street or in a bar or whatever, and that you would ever imagine or think that a character like that with a personality like that, and I never would have done it, would have never entered, be part of my life.
In my impression, if folks are robbing banks, typically the end result is getting caught, right? If that, you go to prison, right? The bank robbery stop, or you move on to a different location, different part of the country, and the robberies are going to continue. It's kind of like a serial murder case to some degree, and they don't stop. And with this last robbery that they did, I was hoping for, at the time thinking the greed's going to kick in, right? They're going to come back. They've gotten over $1 million already. So why would they come back? Because they're going to come back. It's a given. It's going to happen. So, I was counting on that, because if they had stopped after the robbery before that, we wouldn't be talking.
We wouldn't be talking.
No.
Or if we did. He wanted to do it in Chicago when I was still living in Chicago, and he had a warehouse, and so you could drive your vehicles in and park, and so he actually got to get up. But I said, man, I don't want to do this here. I don't like it. I don't want to be Chicago police. The whole environment is just a different energy. It's rougher. It's tough. You're not. I don't know what it is, but the personality of Seattle was very accommodating. Does that make sense to you?
I think in places like Chicago, the density is, we always say that the more urban you are, cops trip over each other. And the more rural you get, the larger square miles that you get, the infrequency of them being able to be there or make a patrol pass. So, but I will say too, culturally, Chicago and Seattle would be two different things policing wise. Yeah, and whole nother topic there. Whole nother topic.
Because even the people in the banks in Chicago, they're much more alert. There's a different energy, they're more of a questionable, and it's a tighter feeling, and anyway, he wanted to do it, and he kind of did it. And I said, we went out, and I said, boarded. I said, no, man, this is not good. This is not working.
And I would, on a daily basis, go through other reports from other divisions, just to see if there's any similar MOs, right? And, looking other, Chicago, for example, it was difficult because we had a number of robberies, but, of course they did, Scott did, 2 in Portland also, which one didn't work out too well because they got no money. But
that was
the vault teller wasn't there.
The vault teller
didn't show up for work today, so he had to leave.
Well, the one was he got that little bit that was the guy followed him out.
Yeah,
that one. But then we went back to the other one, which is a very it was on Hawthorne Road in Portland.
38th and Hawthorne.
38th and Hawthorne. And the major banks that we got the most money from in Seattle was called the Hawthorne branch. So that was prophetic for Scott. And plus the bank was everything just looked beautiful. And in this context, it was, are you interested in hearing the story about this? We
let's go.
Weather reports. We'd always look for weather, and we always wanted rainy or stormy weather, all of this. And, we would dress for it appropriately. I'd disguise him appropriately. And in this case, we'd been waiting and waiting. We'd done surveillance down in Portland for quite a, number of days and, and got everything figured out. And I had the drop-off car sent from San Francisco up to Olympia, his getaway car. And then we had another van from San Francisco that I was driving, an Astro, or some kind of I don't know what it was, Aerostar or something. I don't know what it was, and we drove down in that. We had his getaway car parked down there in the place that he was going to go get in and then go to the bank. And we were waiting for the weather to be really bad. And so we were, listening to the weather reports in the morning, and there's huge rain in Portland, south of Olympia into Portland. And so it was just radical rain. And so we got up, takes about hour and a half to get to Portland from Olympia. 2 hours, on I-5. And so we get up and, he's dressed up. He's got this long, beige raincoat, and fedora or whatever his hat was at that day. And, his get up. And, when he had to put his makeup on before leaving for Portland. And so he's done it and it itches. He says it gets him very irritable because it starts itching after a while. So we're driving and, the closer we get to Portland, you see this line in the sky, sunshine, dark clouds where we're, up to where we're at, and then a sunshine. And anyway, we get to Portland at about 9 o'clock or something, or 10 o'clock. And it's sunny, hot and sunny. And here he is in this long raincoat. Everything was wrong. You know what I mean?
Conditions have changed.
The conditions changed. And in this case, I was not stationary. I was circling the block. And of course, I had all the radio frequency for Portland and all that. And, everything was set and cool. And it was a perfect location. He goes in through the back door. And that door in the back of the bank, which was a normal door to enter into, it wasn't abnormal to do that, but it was right by the drive-thru. And it was actually kind of right before lunch, maybe about 11 o'clock or 10:30 or something. And I'm circling, and he goes into this bank, and he got in there. He was just like irritated because of the weather. Everything was messing up. He still did it. We didn't abort it. And here he is. He goes in and he goes to the vault. And he says he wants the vault teller. And it's one of these classic old big metal vaults, what you always see in the movies. It was an old building too. And finally this lady comes, skimping out. They said the vault teller's not here. And then she finally comes out and he goes, "Oh, he's not here. Okay, come over, get over here, And she starts undoing, opening the vault up with the spinning, lock thing. And he goes, just get it open. Just quit delaying. Just get it open. Let's get this thing over with. And he opens the door and he said he'd never seen so much money in his whole life. It was just from floor to ceiling, stacked with money. And then at that point, I had to call him out. And he didn't get anything. And it was a disaster. I had to get out,
Yeah.
And what had happened is that there was a person in the drive-thru that saw this character go in. And you're talking sunshine. It was hot. And he has this long trench coat on.
There we go. That's called a clue.
And he had to have it because his gun was disguised in it and everything.
And one of the witnesses described, she overheard this radio communication. They're on their way. Which
is that what I said? Yeah.
That's what they're on their way, of course. At that point in time,
he's gone.
We got to get out of here.
So we went to our rendezvous point, and this was what both of the vehicles we had, because we brought them from California. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and they both had California plates. Well, his getaway car, we didn't care. We wanted that because we wanted the FBI to get it and trace it back to where we bought it in the Mission District in San Francisco. But the van that I had, which we used for a number of times after the fact, we normally would go to the airport in Seattle and find a vehicle that was the same as our vehicle, whatever the car was, and then we would take their license plates off and put other license plates on it, because you don't come out in your car and you see a license plate. We'd have legit license plate on our car. Well, he never did that. And for some reason he didn't, but we always did it, and he didn't want to do it. And this is what was upsetting me. We're in a little area of Portland, kind of a residential commercial area. And what is the likelihood of 2 California plates in the same 3 or 4 block area? And I said, Scott, man, I got these California plates on, and they're going to pick your car up with California plates, and they're going to stop anybody with California plates. Okay. I mean, and we come up to the street that we had to turn right on to go down to back to the I-5, and right across the other side of that street, I think it was Powell. I don't know what the name of the street was, but anyway, there was a cop who was on its way to go to the bank, which he would have gone the opposite direction we wanted to go. And we were both waiting on traffic so we could enter the avenue. And I go, Scott, get down there and don't get up. The cop is right over there. If he sees these California license plates, he's going to stop us.
They must be up to something.
Yeah, there's no way. Well, thank God, for everybody. He turned the way toward the bank, and then we turned right and we got home. And but that was you see, for us is when you're doing bank robbery, your mistakes, you learn more from your mistakes than you do your successes.
So did we.
Yeah, and so did they. Yeah, and that was a close call. And what did we do? We go to Bud Bay, which is a nice cafe restaurant in Olympia, right on the water. And we would go and we'd buy a bottle of Dom Perignon, and I would scream at him and tell him, don't ever do that again. And he would just laugh. He always had this calm thing, because I'd get crazy. I mean, not crazy, but, we can't do this. I can't keep going on like this. I can't do this anymore.
And then 5 months after that, the first Portland robbery, they hit another bank U.S. bank down there. And he got about 22,000.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah, he had to abort that.
They had a blue Ford Aerostar van that they left on purpose.
That's what we left there.
Yeah, in Portland. So that was the first vehicle that had been recovered. Of course, at the time, we didn't know if it was on purpose or just whatever had happened. But then subsequent to that, I recovered 2 other vehicles from 2 other robberies in Seattle and traced back the original owners to the vehicle station wagons. So I think, well, maybe we get something out of this, right? So I brought a sketch artist with me at both of those. And who was the person they bought the car for cash 2 months in advance? They gave a description. And I put the posters out in the public. Do you know this person? And blah, blah, blah. And we did the first vehicle we recovered, other than the sketch, we got nothing much. But we knew where the cars had purchased between, Tacoma area and such. The second station wagon, I got another sketch. But I brought the owner up. I said, take a look at this car. What's different about it than when he sold it 2 months ago? He said, those are new types. New tires. Okay. So I was able to trace the tires back to a store in Tacoma, Washington, and purchased there. Now, I was hoping the credit card would be used, of course, we paid for cash. But at that point, I knew there was a connection between the locations of the vehicles being purchased. And also now we had activity buying tires for this car in Tacoma, Washington. The Tacoma, Olympia area, it's got to be some connection here. Of course, Scott lived in Olympia.
Yeah. I mean, we always paid anything that's cash. I mean, anytime we got a car that was going to be dropped off or used, we'd always get new batteries, but it was always paying cash.
Yeah.
You never. And then we would hire people like, I think that one, as I recall, I would go look for a vehicle. You'd get on these used cars magazines they had back in the day, and you'd go to wherever, private home or whatever it was, and I would go look at it and talk to them and act like I was interested. And I say, okay, I got to look at a couple more cars. I'll get back to you if if I decide on it. And then, obviously if I wanted it, then I would go. And in this case, I think there was a hippie guy, one of these normal hippie guys that just hang around, whatever. He didn't know Scott, and I don't know where I found him. He didn't really know me either, but I offered him $1,000, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say average price of the ones I found. One was $800, one was $1,200. What's it bought in cash for?
Yeah, we pay cash, but we give the person $1,000 to go buy it. And then he'd go buy it, or she would go buy it and bring the car back. And then we would wait a month before.
At least a month, something. Usually about 2 months
before we use it.
Purchase the vehicle and using it in a robbery.
Yeah, because we'd want the people, when we're going to leave it for the FBI, we would want the people to be can't remember who it was that bought it. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So, there was a lot. And then, a beautiful story in San Francisco when I had purchased these cars in San Francisco, the two that we were talking about in Portland. And this one, the one yellow one that Scott had is to leave the police that we left there. And it was in the Mission District. And this is just so cinematic. With any luck, this thing turns into a beautiful streaming story because this is American culture, really. And, and there's so many sub stories within the book and within all the things that went on. But anyway, I'm in there and I go to the Mission District. They were immigrants. I don't know where they were from, but it was one of these townhouses with 3 stories, and all they did was rent rooms out to, immigrants coming in. It was all Hispanic. And, they didn't speak English, and he had this, and I go in there and I think he wanted whatever it was, $1,000 or something. And I had them all in 20s, and I walk in and he takes me up to his room and I wanted to get the title. And the title was, he hadn't even changed the title. All these people are illegal. Everything they do, I don't know how they get away with it, but everything they do, it's perfect for us. It was perfect for us. But I go in there and he has his girlfriend or his wife, and she's having a baby suckle on her breast. And there's all these blinking Jesus lights and stream in this one room, and I'm laying out these 20s, 1,000, and at that time, $1,000 had some meaning. It doesn't anymore, but it meant something. And especially the people that are, struggling. Mm-hmm. And it was just so, you can't imagine doing something like, you can't be a writer wanting to write a criminal story with something like that happened. It's so beautiful. And you see the inner workings of society. The things we saw and did in different areas of town. And when another example is going down after a robbery in Seattle, and we went down Martin Luther King Way that headed down toward the old Kingdom to get to the freeway. And it was an area where prostitutes were. And, it's just, they were lined up on the streets, and you're at a stoplight, and what do? He's got a bunch of $1 bills and $5 bills. Scott just throws it out on the street for them. It's just like, they have stuff like that. It's not like you're going to get a prostitute, but, they're all running and they're getting the money. And in one sense, it's condescending and repulsive, but on the other end, they don't care. They want, it's money. It's free money. What's it, and it was meaningless to us.
Yeah, and looking at the motivations for Scott doing this, right? And then Stephen kind of touched on this, as the money was a motivation, but it wasn't every motivation. There was other factors in that.
Yeah.
The challenge, maybe. The adrenaline rush.
There was no adrenaline.
Well, no,
there was
never,
never,
Scott.
Not even. Oh no! We were like
focused. I know, but
it was focused. It was slow. Everything was in slow motion. It was like this deep bass. Boom, 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 boom. And everything was like, acute. There was no high. The high would come from a release once we got to the treehouse. Even on our way back, we were just as clandestine on our way back. We wouldn't use the radio because, we assumed you guys were scanning our frequency. It was just normal Motorola frequencies, 400 something megahertz. Mm-hmm. You could have easily scanned all that.
Yeah.
And, we did it until we got home, and didn't speed, didn't get high, didn't go get drunk. And, everything was cerebral. They all say that in adrenaline, but the adrenaline was the life we led after the fact.
Yeah. Might have we're talking.
Yeah, you had adrenaline. You had the shake. No, it was scary. It was like, I felt that I was in a position that always protect Scott. I was there to protect him from anything. We had if he on his getaway and I was in my car and he was in a getaway, I would sometimes shadow him a block away and remain on the scanner to hear if they identified his car. As soon as I heard from the dispatch and the police that there was no identification in the car, the person, the perp left on foot west or whatever he did. And as soon as I was clear that there was no identification of his car, then it meant he could take the car back to Olympia. And if not, he was going to abort it and I would rendezvous with him and pick him up. And
And speaking of vehicles, so when they had robbed the Seafers Bank was Madison Park branch, this is the third time they hit this bank, which was in January 95. They got $250,000 from this robbery, right? So I'm thinking, well, when's the next robbery going to occur? You know, are we going to be prepared for it? Can we respond? Can we do something proactive here? So and this was in the Netflix show too. So I started going back, diving into the case files, looking at the bank's locations, the structure of the banks, the routes, ingress, egress from the locations, what routes they may be taking, the amount of money they were taking, just a lot of factors involved. So I came up with this prediction. You know, they're going to rob one of these 3 days a year later in that January of '96. So I had set up surveillances at likely locations. This would have been January 23rd, 24th, 25th, a year later. So we had the task force in place at that time. So I set up a schedule, you know, we're going to sit on these banks this day, the next day on these banks, the third day. So the first day, a lot of folks were interested because, yeah, we'll see if this happens, and nothing happened. So the second day, fewer folks came out because I got work to do. I got other things. So this is, you know, what's the likelihood of this happening? Nothing happened. So the third day, I'm sitting probably within a number of blocks away, and they hit the First Interstate Bank in Wedgwood, just up from my location. I knew immediately when I heard the call, that's Hollywood. I was like, shit. And I raced up there, and that's when we recovered the second station wagon.
Yeah, he left that.
He left that.
That was the one without die pack.
No.
No? Okay.
But I remember we covered the vehicle, and I'm just trying to get some connection here. So I went over to the vehicle, and I mean, these vehicles were clean. There was nothing in there of evidentiary value.
Yeah, we made those things, you know, clean.
And this was within minutes of the robbery. And I sat in the driver's side next, and I said, these guys were here just minutes ago. I'm sitting here now, and they're gone. Damn it.
I mean, they called Scott the ghost.
I called him a ghost. Yeah, what is he, a ghost?
He was just there, and then he was gone, you know. And
you know,
if you saw him on the street, I remember once on 35th Street, the one we were doing, I think it was a U.S. Bank there. I believe it was a U.S. Bank. And I was sitting there on the main avenue because it was the only place to be. And I was watching Scott come up from behind the bank on the main street. And to see him from a distance, it's like this apparition. I don't know how to explain it. It's a slow motion, this image it was uncanny. You just don't, I don't know how to explain it. It was human. It was a person, but it wasn't. And he had this authority about him. I don't know. He just had a spine of steel or something.
And people ask me, you know, talk about Scott Skurlock. And I said, I don't know Scott Skurlock. I know Hollywood. I never met Scott Skurlock. And I still feel that way to today. You know, that was my goal at the end of this investigation was, as I did with Stephen and Mark, sit down and talk about how they did things, right? Learn something. And I never had that opportunity with Scott because he took things in his own hands. So I knew Hollywood. I didn't know Scott. And that's one of the things I think about quite often is that's not the outcome I was wishing for. You don't wish death upon anybody. And, you know, he took his own life. But even with that, you know, there was no closure at that point in time. And my wife and I, during the course of investigation, of course, she was living this day to day with me and my wife, Marie. And we were going to plan this big celebration, right? When this whole thing culminated and everything was finished, we're going to throw a party. So when this all came down, we both agreed. I said, there's nothing to celebrate here. There's nothing to celebrate. And other folks did. But for me personally, I didn't feel like, I was relieved that this was over, but there was no celebration in my mind whatsoever, you know, and I still feel that way.
That's not the outcome any of us look for in this is losing anybody. And again, I think that curiosity, another thing too, that the people were in the banks, and y'all didn't hurt anybody, but there's a lot of trauma that happens when people encounter that is not having the ability for Scott to stand for that probably took a little away from them too. Granted, Stephen, you went away. I guess Mark went away. By the way, Stephen, how much time did you end up serving after the proffer and the?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak to the sentencing portion of it because the plea agreement went into effect in February of '97. March is when I sat down with Stephen for 4 days going through, from start to end, right? And that's same with Mark. Mark was only one day because his participation was more limited over the course of the robberies. And then that was April when I interviewed Mark, and then May was the sentencing. And both Stephen and Mark got 21 years and 3 months was the sentence. And it was for conspiracy to commit bank robbery, use of a firearm for the robbery, assault on a federal officer, and use of a firearm in the assault. So that ended up 21 years, 3 months. And they also had, I think, 5 years probation after that. So, supervised release, yeah. So that was the legal aspect as far as the sentence is concerned.
Yeah,
interesting. I'm going to shift back a little bit and get back into the robbery thing because I want to ask Shawn something that occurred a few minutes ago. Shawn, when you all were following Scott and them around and working toward figuring out who they were, was there ever a point when you looked at it and you decided that you could move away from the fact that they've just got dumb luck there was a moment where you said, these cats actually have their shit together? Can you remember any watershed moment like that?
Well, again, the progression of the sophistication of the robberies, I could see that from the beginning, when they wear president's masks and they can't get the getaway car stalls out, and then about 4 or 5 robberies later, they decide the vaults are an option too. And then again, just the planning, you could see that was going into place, the cars being purchased months in advance, at least one other individual outside on comms, radio in to Scott, when it's time to leave. And then on occasion, bringing a second person to the bank. So I knew that this was not your average bank robbery, right? So that's why I think realized this was a very professional job. And, I respect professionalism, and, I'm thinking, well, these guys are going to be a challenge, and I'm going to have to step up my game to make sure this is going to work for me, for the FBI. I don't know if that answers your question, but you could see the progression and how things were working. Again, at the last robbery, I was counting the fact that, what I had set in place with the tracking devices, with the surveillances, with everything else that I did, and the proactive nature, that I was hoping these guys would come back, because absent that, it would not have come to any conclusion.
It did. Hey, and Stephen, can I ask you something? Because you were pretty obviously close to Scott. If you could talk to Scott today, what would you say to him? If you had this availability to meet him face to face and speak to him with everything that's transpired, what would you say to Scott?
That's difficult. The one side of me, when I woke up in the hospital and it said he was dead, deceased, I was happy because I knew that was his last. And I knew that having to face what we were facing, it was no option for him. It was a release. It was a release for me too, but now if I were to see him, we would probably just embrace each other like we would do and go to a bar or a restaurant and have fun like we had fun. I don't know if we would criticize each other about what you did. You see, I told you not to have Sheila come up. I told you not to do that. We should have. I probably would say, how we could have beaten this thing is not take the 20s. That's probably the first thing I would have said to him. Not take the 20s. Just take hundreds and 50s.
Yeah.
Or maybe next time, for sure, let me drive when I say I'm driving.
Yeah, next time, let me drive.
And if I had a chance to say something to him, Scott, hell of a job. It's over. Let's sit down and talk.
Yeah, it's over. Let's just talk.
Yep.
From a point of view, like I said, with my book, if you have finesse and understanding, you can actually, you need some money to start it, like what we were doing, but you can learn how to rob a bank, because the way they are taught on Hollywood, going in with guns and all of that stuff, is just a myth. In fact, I think they want you to think that so that chaos can ensue.
Yeah, because now this is occurring in the mid-'90s, and I joined the FBI in '87, so a year or so before that, they had the Miami shootout with the bank robbers down there, right? 2 agents were killed, 3 were wounded. I actually met one of the agents when I was going through Quantico. So the mindset was the violent nature of the crime itself. And it does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all. But that was kind of the mindset in the FBI. And then from that point in time, when the Miami shootout occurred, all agents were carrying revolvers, wheel guns. And because of the Miami shootout, we transitioned into semi-automatic pistols. But it was a perception that it was like Point Break, it came up and heat and all those things. That's the Hollywood image of it. But there is, like I said, the perfect example in the Hollywood shootout in Los Angeles. Two guys had the
that was
ballistic
after.
vest on.
Yeah, that was after.
But so as a law enforcement officer, our main goal is to go home at night. That's the goal. Go home at night with your families. So you do everything you can in order to protect yourself, protect your partners, and protect innocent parties out there too. So, but again, also not using excessive force that's not necessary.
That's the whole goal. That's what it's all about for most people, anyway. For most people, and again, keeping it professional and keeping it business, Shawn. That's just so important because I've bumped into people that I dealt with years ago, and it's amazing how you run into them and there's no angst.
Right.
Right before I retired, I was in a grocery store and there was a guy in line in front of me, and his clothing looked really familiar. And he mentions to the clerk that he just got out of prison, and we spoke for a few minutes, and I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I gave him my card. I didn't know him at the minute, but I gave him my card, and I said, if there's anything I can help you with, this is my cell phone number, because, man, shit, he's out. He should get a shot. And I left the parking lot, and I remember we had put him in prison for hiring somebody to kill his girlfriend and his kid. Mm-hmm. And he was dressed the same way he was the day we locked him up. That was freaky. It looked like a Land's End catalog. But the point being is that, there was something I knew him from. And even then when I drove away, I just called a friend of mine and said, hey, I just ran into Land. That was his name. Yeah. And it's over. It's done.
Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.
Hey everybody, it's Wendy. In case you didn't know, David finally got off his butt and finished his book, True Crime and Consequences. The book is super educational and talks about the world of true crime and where it meets real investigations. It is perfect for everyone, from true crime fans like myself, to the true crime podcaster or YouTuber, to the amateur detective or web sleuth. And not to leave anyone out, you cops need to read this book too. True Crime and Consequences is available at murderpolicepodcast.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, well, pretty much anywhere you'd find a great book like this. So true crime fans, go get your copy today.